Okay, guys, thank you for holding this. Oh man, thanks for holding this space for me. My question is going to be, due to the hormonal fluctuations throughout the menstrual cycle, can we design a nutrition program in adherence with these changes to more effectively increase fat loss results in women? Women specifically, obviously men don't menstruate, so that was my target. This is called the menstrualing diet, and originally I had heard about this through a JTita podcast and then kind of forgot about it. And then recently I had a client ask me about this, so I figured that this was a great time because it was a new topic. I didn't have an answer for them, and I never really did any kind of research. So the guidelines with this whole entire thing were awesome and great opportunity for this. So in one study of this, the 31 women who completed the entire 24-week trial, we had the ones that were syncing their menstruation cycle with their nutrition. They lost nearly 9.5 more pounds than the women who were just following a general calorie deficient diet. Now, oops, wrong direction. So, the simple story. This is kind of just off one of those blogs that you find if you're just going to be like, okay, how am I going to do this? We have a lot of awesome, exciting things you can find. So, the upside is going to be it delivers key foods at critical times to help decrease body fat, breakouts, PMS, and other period problems. The downside is you'll realize how much time you've lost feeling bloated, fatigued, and moody. So, simple cycle-related tweaks. So, this is how they're setting up the program. We see from the day 6 to 15, so this is going to be as soon as we finish bleeding, we're going to be going and eating more protein. The rise in estrogen helps build more muscles, so the added protein helps maximize the hormonal benefit. So higher estrogen, more fat burning, and muscle building. And then from day 16 to 28 after ovulation, then we can go and continue to eat higher amounts of protein, always more protein, right? And then we can also, we're going to be more insulin resistant at this time, and I'll go into talk about how the hormones are actually changing for this, but we're going to be higher in progesterone, so more fat storing and muscle sparing. And then from day 24 to 28, we get chocolate because, you know, PMS is just the best time to eat chocolate, right? So, normal menstrual cycle length. From this, we have the normal days is going to be the median duration from 28 to 30 days, really, and the menstrual cycle is going to be divided into 2 phases. So, I'm going to actually draw this out to kind of help go and present this simple story on what's going on, right? So, we're going to have, oh shoot, I'm going to put this down. I keep pushing buttons. Okay. So we're going to have the first phase over here, and this is going to be where we're bleeding at, okay? And it's going to go all the way into ovulation, and then over until we have the end of the menstrual cycle, and it begins all over again. So the first half over here, this is going to be the follicular phase, and then from ovulation until the end, or the beginning of menses, that's going to be the luteal phase. So it's broken up throughout those 28 days, where we have... We'll go into it. You see, the duration of the normal menstrual flow could range between women, and it can go from anywhere from 2 to 8 days. So that's just going to be this part right here. And then the remaining of the follicular phase will be up until that point of ovulation. From ovulation until we start bleeding again, that's going to be that luteal phase, okay? So with that in mind, we can go on and start talking about the hormones involved. So this is going to be more up in the hypothalamus, pituitary. We have the GnRH, which is going to stimulate the production of LH and FSH. FSH is going to stimulate the growth and development of the follicle and then mature it into the egg. And then the luteinizing hormone will cue ovulation and causes the rupture of the mature the follicle, releasing the egg. So we have rising estrogen levels during the follicular phase that triggers the pituitary gland to release the luteinizing hormone. Now, so to go and talk about this, we have this period point, we're bleeding, and then at that end of menses, that's when we're going to have our brain get a signal, and from that point, we're going to start to see this rise in estrogen, right? And that rise in estrogen is going to go over through the follicular phase. Now, throughout that time, that rise in estrogen is going to be responsible for the maturing and growing of the uterine lining, so it's going to help the maturing of the egg. Now, with that, the rise in estrogen is caused by FSH. So right around here, the brain is going to get that signal for FSH. That's what that comes into play. Throughout the next couple weeks or throughout the next couple of days, as that rise in estrogen increases, we're going to have that follicle maturing. Once the follicle is matured and the brain notices that rise in estrogen, it's going to have the LH hormone, which is going to go and cause the ovulation, okay? So from there, we have the drop in estrogen, and then we're going to cross over into the luteal phase. Now, the follicle is now matured, and then we're going to get the corpus luteum. That corpus luteum is now going to start producing progesterone and estrogen, or progesterone mostly. So we're going to have progesterone align here, and then it's going to start increasing over through the luteal phase. Once that's gone, we're going to have another rise in estrogen, and then they both kind of take this sudden drop off right before we start this next phase, which is going to go and help cause that menstruation. So a lot of times when women aren't bleeding, that's when we're going to have that drop off. We're going to cause that drop off so we can encourage that menstrual cycle to begin. So responsible, estrogen. We got progesterone now. Helps prepare your uterine lining for a fertilized egg. It's an agonist to estrogen, so it's insulin resistant. It tolerates less carbs. The metabolism is not as ramped up as before, so we may have more stress reactive than usual. This is going to continue and rise and fall of estrogen, and progesterone has effect on fat storage and fat burning. These two influence two primary fat regulating hormones, so it's going to go into the insulin and cortisol side of things, making the body more sensitive to insulin. Both estrogen and progesterone help buffer the negative effects of cortisol, the stress hormone that promotes fat storage. So going into some of these studies, this is going to be a weight loss program adapted to the menstrual cycle, increases weight loss in healthy overweight premenopausal women. It was a 6-month randomized controlled trial. So a different diet and exercise program that is tailored to counteract food cravings and metabolic changes throughout the menstrual cycle may increase weight loss above that achieved with traditional diet and exercise. So again, it's a total of 60 overweight premenopausal women. They had a 6-month and they were randomly assigned to either a combined diet and exercise program that was tailored to metabolic changes, or they were just following simple energy restrictions. This is going to be from that study. So you can see that during the phase 1, so this is like phase 1 where we're bleeding, and then into phase 2 at that second or like early and late follicular phase. Over here with the carbohydrate and the fat especially, you see that it's at 60, and then we go into phase 2 with 50 and then 40. So they're changing these variables of what kind of macronutrients they're going to be eating throughout the cycle. When we see here, we have this line. This is going to be the overall women who were in the study, whether they completed it or not. So we didn't have very much adherence to the study. Down here is the women who actually were adhering and completed the study. The dotted line is who are just on the normal energy restriction diet. And then down here, the solid line, that's the women who were on that menstruation diet where it's like they were going and changing their carbs and their fats as they went through. Now, the study limitations, the protein content of the menstruating diet was higher in the control groups, and eating more protein is an effective weight loss strategy already. They didn't take into account the individual hormonal fluctuations. They had low completion rates. It was an open label design, so the women who were on the menstruating diet, they were aware, they were more excited about participating in this, so that could have heightened their results.
Can I ask a question?
Is that, yeah.
You sure?
Yeah,
Okay, so
of course.
I don't want to interrupt you. Where do they? I didn't interrupt you. I know, I'm super interested. I was like, oh shit, man, I really want to know. Did they understand or see how the women were before they went into the study, in the sense of like, were they healthy, were they active, like what was the population before they went in?
Oh, well, they were like overweight women. So what I was in like activity levels and things like before they started the trial. I might have something that I glazed over. I'm not sure.
Okay.
So I know that they were like healthy overweight women. So healthy in parentheses because I'm not sure how healthy overweight women. Yeah. Yeah, and then so the practice in general public could have much less effectiveness just because we have this level of adherence that sometimes even in the study they were having a hard time keeping to. So, did I go backwards? Okay, here we go. So foods, this is going to be, again, just like a part of that simple story on one of the blogs where you're looking up, like, how do I go and schedule my nutrition alongside my menstrual cycle? So first, before you even get to like the good stuff on how they're even talking to you, they're like, okay, you're gonna want to stay away from processed foods, white sugar, flour, and all these other things that we already know are gonna improve their general like state, right? These things already help with fat loss. So it's almost like, all right, you're gonna do all these things, but first, let's already put you a head start with making sure that the general income or the intake of your food is where it wants to be, where we want it to be. Now, another one, we have the biochemical individuality. So when we're talking about scheduling this in adherence with their changes, it's really hard to understand like where they're at in each point of time, just because the hormonal changes for every individual, whether you're male or female, is so different that it's going to be hard to kind of like time this appropriately. So the luteal phase in the cycle is relatively consistent, so this is that endpoint, but the variability of the cycle length is going to be more in the follicular phase, which can range from about 10 to 16 days. So we already have this half being very variable, right? And then we're not checking their hormones all the time. So unless you are working with a client who knows when they're ovulating, then it's going to be hard to kind of get really specific with these things. Then over here we have this, and this is going to be the LH surges in normal fertile women. It's going to be different in configuration, amplitude, and duration. So you can see up here that these lines, they have multiple LH surges throughout it, and I'm not sure what that means, but when I create my simple story on how the menstrual cycle works, we have one LH surge, and that's going to be rupturing the follicle for ovulation. So with these multiple peaks, if there's a difference, if there's not a difference, I think that this is just a good example of even in normal women who are like have a normal cycle, they still have a lot of changes throughout that, right? So it's kind of like we have this idea of like the one LH surge, but I don't know, it kind of confuses me when I'm like, wait, but they're normal and they have multiple LH surges. Then we have multiple peaks in LH surges, and they were associated with smaller pre-voluntary follicles and prolonged LH surges. The multiple peaks might have symptom of follicular insufficiency, and prolonged LH surge might be a sign of luteal insufficiency. So just of like, okay, what these things and why they're changing, what's going on. And we have this, okay, so the underlying study of the inadequacy of using the mean hormonal profiles, because the hormonal profiles that differ from classic mean curves are frequently found in healthy women. So 52% of the individual curves differed in the shape of a typical curve. So looking up here, my little curves here that don't really, wow, can you even see that? Okay, so these curves that are happening, again, that's the simple story here. There's a lot more things going on in over half the women who have this natural or this normal state of menstruation. So this is going to be hormones from normal women, women with normal cycles. You can see, all right, so the red or the pink is going to be estrogen, blue is progesterone, and we can see that the rise and fall of these are very irregular compared to, again, this graph. Over here, we can see that we never have, we have multiple peaks of estrogen over here. This one goes all the way up over here, but down here, the progesterone in this woman is so low until that last drop off. So there's a lot of things going on, although they're still cycling normally. Then metabolic changes throughout the Am I going backwards again? Okay. It's recognized that the metabolic responses to insulin may be modified by estrogens and progesterone. This is consistent with greater insulin responsiveness to food at the time of menstruation. This would perhaps accord with the tendency to utilize less and store more carbohydrates during feeding in the early follicular phase. Now we can see on this, we have the different phases of the cycle, and we're going to be going and looking at early follicular phase, late follicular phase, early luteal, and then late luteal. Carbohydrates are up here, then we have fats. You can see that these are slightly different throughout the cycle, but it also says that because of those differences, and you can see their differences right down here, it's not significant, okay? So they're just letting you know, you see these changes, we found these changes, but they're not significant to really make a big change. Now, while fasting, they had a minimum rate of carbohydrate utilization during the menstruation and a maximum rate 1 week later in the late follicular phase. The two values were, again, not significant, and the fat utilization during the fasting was minimum in the early follicular phase and in the late follicular phase, and the rate of carbohydrate utilization was lowest in the first few days of the cycle and then rose to a maximum value before ovulation. So this is just going and talking in, okay, because of this rise and fall of estrogen and progesterone, these are what's going on with actually the utilization of these macros. Now, there are some changes in body weight and in carbohydrate, fat, and metabolism, but not so great to achieve statistical significance and analysis of variance. Now, the study limitations, we had a small study population of just 8. It had unlimited food intake, so the changes may have been much greater, but these would have reflected on the combined effects of altered nutrition intake. So, looking further, we have now, just because of this, the deeper understanding of I really like how Ben talks about this, where women are when they're losing fat, they're bowling with a tornado and a hurricane, there's no bumpers, right? So that's just a good picture of because of this continual rise and fall, these hormonal changes, it's hard to pinpoint what we're going through and when. Now, the variability in normal cycles, it's not normal, as we can see. So we have a whole lot of changes that are going on that are still producing the effect that we need. And then we have slight metabolic changes during the cycle that could go into effect. So if we can dial in, and if we have a client who could adhere to this program and are really on top of their things, I think that this could work. I'm not sure how greatly it could work, but again, it's something that I think is difficult because, first of all, for the normal client, it's hard for them to go into and get into a adherence where they're just eating good and they're eating consistently. And I think if we can get them eating consistently and eating the right foods and the right quality of foods, then that's going to be a way higher thing than just scheduling all of this stuff. A lot of the times it's hard for people to make those changes. So then it's unless you're working with a specific client, I think that this is another tool that you can use, and because just the adherence is a must. Other than if you're not adhering and you're not working along with these hormones, then really you're just trying to keep yourself entertained. Yes, that was it. That's all I have. So I am ready for questions.
I got one. You're awesome. You did such a good job. I'm mind blown over here right now. Sorry, I got 6,000 questions in my head. So, my bad. My bad, man. I'll let you guys speak after I'm done. So, do you feel like it'd be beneficial if you say to grab more adherence, if you cycle map the woman prior to adhering this type of? Yeah,
I mean, especially if you're going to have more of an idea of what kind of hormonal fluctuations they're going through, and then they have that idea, it could. Did
you read anything? Did they cycle map them before, or they just
no, they just, generic model. Yeah, they weren't sure about any kind of the hormonal changes.
Okay, I'm done.
Whose hand was up first? I'm not sure. We'll go from left to right.
My question is really fast. So these were all women with no birth control.
Yes, this is going to be, so that's again something that I didn't even touch on, because that's a whole different world, because now it's this is just normal cycling women who aren't on any contraceptives or anything.
Yes. When they did the diet, and I might just be an idiot. When they did the diet stuff, how do they track it? Was it just here's your percentages, go fucking do it, or control it? Because what I see is if they're on their own, no one's gonna report, right?
They do. They had weekly consultations with a nutritionist.
Okay. They just See, that's when it's crazy, because then
that was my big thing.
It's not that it's not valid, but they all lost weight sort of because they're all one of the weight loss things.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys see the macro changes?
Yeah,
Let's see, where was that?
Wasn't that much, right?
10%.
Yeah. And there's gonna be. I was just wondering how they did that, because that's okay. So.
Yeah, so we didn't have there wasn't very much changes, and then it's even with the protein, they kept it pretty similar throughout the entire way.
And I wonder, we deal with a lot of women, did they even hit their protein?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that weekly check-in, who knows how much that was really helping, especially because were they keeping food logs? Were they checking in with these food logs? Did they even look at anything like that?
What about the exercise? Is it just
They had.
They eat the same so if they completely stick to the calories on the menstruating diet, they're gaining a large dose.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's like a big thing too. I think they just kept the exercise normal throughout. They had something mentioned on exercise, and I could go back and look and let you know if you really want to know. But oh, is it?
One of the programs was.
Okay, here. So yeah, they didn't have very much cardio, or I mean, very much exercise, right? So yeah, there, and then that was another thing too, and another part of like I kind of cut this in half because I wanted to go and look into like the exercise and nutrition side of it, but it was a little over my head, so I wanted to kind of like be able to dig deeper for myself. You can go and like look into that as well, where it's like because of like the rise and fall and things like of the hormones, where we're going to change the exercise just to more benefit those changes.
So in addition to, so the U.S. Women's soccer team, their strength and conditioning coach, they implemented this style. So for each individual, the 28 players, they did like protein or just macro cycling and the program cycling. So for each of the players, and so granted that wasn't the only thing that contributed to their win, but I don't know if that strength coach and or the team has any papers published. But Alyssa Vitti, Vitti, she's a researcher on that topic. She's got 2 books out and
Very cool.
an app that specifically covers that. I haven't dug into them, but it's very,
She's for it.
She's for it. So she kind of, it's funny. Ben said, a few days ago, you know, she brings up a topic in one of her talks about, we need to stop talking about women as little men. So she does create a little bit of a dichotomy. But from what she says is, the women's hormone cycle through all the phases is not as complicated as we make it out to be. And so each phase does require slightly different nutrition needs. I think, though, she does advocate for slightly more dramatic macro breakdowns. I don't have that information, but I can give you her podcasts or book titles.
It's like nothing changed there. Wow.
That's so
Yeah,
long.
Yeah.
So my question was like the towards the end of the luteal phase, is that when they add the dark? I mean, I know with my
Yeah.
like my clients 3 days before their cycle start is the witching hour. Like that's when I need to like be like, hey, here you go, have a little bit of this because I can pull it back once we get.
Yeah, and then so they said they only off this place that I found, yeah, they recommended that it's only from day 24 to 28.
But like honestly, like if I can, from a psychological standpoint, that's huge.
Yeah, and that's like a whole nother part of it is like depending again on who your client is, if they really take things like you really need to work on the psychology of them. This could be another thing to kind of like tweak in just because it's like another thing for them to think about and like commit to, like make them feel special almost.
Well, if I can give someone a little bit of autonomy in that realm and say like, hey, like, that's huge.
Yeah.
And then say there's some science.
Yeah, right there. She was first.
Sorry, Mike.
Well, we had to talk just briefly about this and kind of giggle about it together because I see stuff like that, and I just giggle. I'm like if you work with females, like, I mean, how many of you guys have clients, females, who track their cycle, know when they're ovulating, are consistently training, are consistent with nutrition? Jesus Christ, like, I mean, there's so many. This stuff makes me kind of laugh because, especially if you're a female, like, we're getting so much of starting to see this sinking to the menstrual diet, like at least kind of through the feeds. So I love that you were talking about this because I was kind of curious to see what you were going to come up with. But I think the point that you made to me is like, maybe there's something to this, to the sport-specific specificity.
Yeah, when there is a lot of things that are like controlled in it instead of like that variability when.
I would bet the farm from external population and external availability. As soon as you find a woman who can do all 4 of those things, you're on the OCD spectrum.
Oh yeah.
I think that you're gonna have a completely different population.
Well, see, I find that I end up tracking the cycle. When I look back and I'm like, hey,
You're on the OCD spectrum.
But if I look at I can see regularity.
I know, I can't.
See, I look at that for different
But what if
reasons.
you give
They're so random.
what if you give somebody the tools? Like, for example, something as simple as an app saying, okay, we start, to get pregnant. And so this is incredibly important for me selfishly. However, adherence is a big problem. It's a big bitch for a lot of us, right? That's why we're here. So how do we get our clients to do it? So what I found helpful, right, is to give, hey, this is a general structure. Okay, this is going to be your set of fluctuations, right? Maybe a macro range, and then a list of activities, and you literally give them, hey, during these 2 weeks, this is what you're doing. You're doing yoga, you're resting. Hey, you're going your period, you feel like shit. Great, yoga, meditation, walking, like prolonged, like easy cardio is really good for like during that phase. So maybe giving like a box of tools and like do like 1, 2, 3 bullet points for each. That way it's simplified. And then you as a coach, if you have that capacity or interest, you worry about all the details right in between.
So Christina, if you believe in this, I would challenge you to do this for week 2 and you will not be happy. Believe that for week 2.
Yeah.
Research that for week 2 and you will not be happy.
Yeah, I think that it just it feeds into.
Because I'm like me telling you this right now, like you're not gonna like it. But I would challenge you to find the truth, like go look at this research, and you're not gonna be overwhelmed at all. Mike, so what kind of difference do you see in fat metabolism, glucose metabolism throughout the cycle?
Well, that's what I was going to even ask. Like, if you look at the graph, it was in grams per hour. You were looking at 1 or 2 grams per hour, and then it wasn't even significant. So you're like, oh, like what? Like what? You sniffed
Where'd
a
I
cookie
go?
and now it's different. You know, it's like,
I would bet on the metal hypothesis.
It sounds to me like it's an adherence thing. It doesn't sound any different. I like the other cycling too.
Yeah.
Which doesn't negate it. And you know, sometimes you need to. Some people need something more complicated than that. And you tell them it's going through their cycle. It's just make them feel special.
Mhm.
But to me, it sounds like no real difference than diet.
Yeah.
My question would be like, I mean, this would be super complicated to do, but like, would they be able to have separate groups on different phases of the cycle, increasing calories? Does that make any difference? At that time, they do a lot of carbohydrates during the luteal phase versus the follicular phase.
Yeah.
Does anything change?
Kind of like almost like make it opposite to see if like that like makes nig that.
I would guess it would be because the outcome is fat loss, right? That's the primary thing that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Did you look at anything else? Any other outcomes? Like any performance?
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to go into. I wanted to go into the performance and just like strength and exercise as well, but I didn't make that far.
Yeah, because I wonder if it'd be different. Because to me, like the fat loss thing is kind of it's an energy thing.
Yeah.
But performance is a different story, you know. So maybe that.
I've definitely dug into that just regarding, and I've read a lot of conflicting studies on whether strength is higher within the follicular phase due to estrogen elevation. So, you know, with my clients that I currently have, I test it out. And I think a lot of it's more psychological than anything. Where the woman's like, oh my, like, especially my.
Especially if you tell them.
Yeah. As soon as you let them know.
That's why I fucked up. There's no doubt.
I don't want to make some fragile on the other end.
But without a doubt, like, I did mess up with telling that. And where these women are super strong for, you know, being almost 50 years old. And I said that one woman was on a period who was dynamically usually stronger than the other. And a lot of the times, if the other one's lifting more, the other one will catch up right away. So what I found out in the accumulation of everything, it's fucking irrelevant. Like, there's so much.
Well, the crazy thing is, like, you guys, Christina's probably seen great results. Brian and I have talked about this ton with PRI. Like I've killed her beliefs. She might kill her own belief structure in this, and that might have really worked for her clients because they both believed it.
oh yeah,
And there was struggle there.
Yeah, have you heard anybody by cycling their cows?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So what would be the risk here?
Yeah.
Like that's what I was talking with Dee. Like what's the risk of that?
Just creating more OCD tenants.
That would be my thing.
Yeah, I think it's like a whole nother level of stress if they're constantly thinking about like changing their nutrition week by week, especially if you're working with like the Gen Pop. You know, they have like their entire life to think about. A lot of times it's hard for me to get people to like want to meal prep. So then it's like if they're thinking about like changing their meal prep routine week by week, like that could be like a whole nother thing that's just like taking them out where it's just like, yeah, I'm doing great, but really I'm just making it, you know.
That's the whole like bad guy theory I say. You just flip it all. Like that, the simple stories work, but they also work. So you can use like if you really want to do it, you knew it wasn't gonna happen anyway, and you got like 12 weeks with it, like well, fuck it. Yeah, this fucking works. Like, yeah, okay, and then they might set up. You can totally, I don't know.
It's interesting, but that works because it works.
For some people, like
Right.
they want it to be hard. They
Yeah.
want it to be a struggle.
Yeah.
Is that ethical to like do that? And that's kind of the big question. Because maybe for that person, you need to lie. Like a white lie. Like white lies exist for. Because
You can make the Machiavellian argument that you should beat people on the ground with training, and like so someone on adhere to your diet, you just beat them down with training until they figure out like, oh, if I need results in this exercise thing, I gotta care about
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would push back because I'm a big believer in behavior change only happens when people feel successful, and you get these constant failures, they're gonna quit and leave. They're not gonna stay around and fail. So like as you stack on that and you decrease their ability because you're giving them more work but they're not eating, that's gonna make the behavior change even harder. They're gonna feel like a failure because they feel like a failure. They don't want to do it because they want to do it. They're not gonna adhere, and you run this really bad non-symbiotic cycle. So that's what I would say
I think
the challenge there would
you
be.
get success initially, then
That's huge.
Then they're addicted to
They're
success,
in. That's
and then you
huge.
get failure, and then they want success back.
Yeah, but you have to sprinkle in success. You can't put people like that's absolutely right. Where if you get them to feel successful at the beginning, the authenticity goes way to the right, and people want to run that more. But you have to give them like success stop points, and everybody has different thresholds. And I think beginners need more success points than like you, right? You can go through 8 weeks and not feel successful, and you're fine. Like 2 years. How do you
But maybe that's how he defines his success, though. Getting more bigger.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Still the same thing.
Tell me to get off that keto diet.
Great presentation.
Yeah, thanks. I honestly, thank you guys. I think that y'all, like, I really appreciate that because I think, like, the conversation that from my presentation was a lot better than the presentation. So just the fact that you guys were able to, like, start that talk was, like, really beneficial to me and to help that, like, me digging into, like, this question.
Me too. I think like so. I think you bring. You take that first part, and you can make that first part.
I'll draw this out a little better, my simple story.
I was going to say, I've watched a lot of med students stand up and try and draw that, and they never get it right. So,
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I practiced.
No, you did really good.
Cool. Thank you guys. That's all.
It's fine to headbutt.
Yeah.
All right, so let's